All right, where did we get to yesterday? We got to the revolution, yes? The beginning of the revolution.
Bunker Hill.
We got to Bunker Hill.
Yeah.
So we got past Lexington and Concord, right? We got past this.
Yeah.
We got like halfway through the
Lexington is a place where the first shots were fired. All right.
No, we stopped at the one that said revolution.
Okay, aircraft carriers, all U.S. naval ships are named after, like, important things. Well, no, some of them are named after people, right? Like, there's the USS Teddy Roosevelt. The Roosevelt's an aircraft carrier, I'm pretty sure. I don't know. I wasn't in the Navy. What do I know? All right. So we got to Bunker Hill, yes? First major battle of the Revolution. We know George Washington is leading the Continental Army. Right? Hopefully we understand, or we got to yesterday, the fact that the 13 colonies are going to band together in order to create some semblance of unity, because that united front is going to provide them with a better chance at success. I want you to understand that the American Revolution is what's the right word? They don't want to fight. They don't, right? In fact, the reality is they're not even really seeking independence initially. They just want the king to, like, address their concerns, right? They send the Olive Branch Petition in 1775, again aimed at trying to find some sort of peaceful resolution to this. They do still identify themselves predominantly as British subjects. Okay? So the idea here of trying to negotiate a peaceful resolution to this appeals to the natives. To the colonists. They also understand that they are grossly outmanned. They are grossly outmatched. The British Army in 1776 is the strongest army in the world. They are the superpower of their day. Okay? The Olive Branch Petition is rejected. The king and Parliament are unwilling to concede to any of the demands of the colonists, which in turn leads to sort of the understanding that there's no alternative but a full-fledged revolution. And Thomas Paine, who was a Virginian, he is a member of the Sons of Liberty that we talked about yesterday, right? He writes honestly, maybe a manifesto. I don't know what the right thing to call it is. I mean, it's not a novel. It's not even like a novella. It's longer than an essay. Like, good God, I'm not calling 55 pages an essay, right? Manifesto could be the right idea, but basically it's this text that urges Americans to fight for independence. It becomes a significant piece of propaganda or a significant aspect of the American Revolution. It generates a significant amount of support, and people are reading this and talking about it, and it takes up the national attention as we begin to understand sort of basic ideas or premises of what is important and what our rights are, our obligations, what government's obligations are to us, right? And so, by the time Thomas Paine writes Common Sense, we're moving to basically a point of no return, right? At this point, a revolution, a freedom or death concept is all that's left, okay? And so we get together again, and we're going to write the Declaration of Independence, which is it's a wonderful document if you've never read it. Okay, it's not that long, but the Declaration of Independence is excellent in the sense that the Declaration of Independence is a philosophical declaration of war. Right? Anybody know what I mean when I say that? Anybody in here ever been in a fight? Like, been in a fist fight? Were you justified?
Yes.
I mean, were you actually?
Yes.
Okay.
You took my friend's stuff.
Wait. That's so you can beat somebody up for theft?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's justifiable.
You would shoot somebody if they tried to come in your house and take your stuff.
No, I would shoot somebody if they came into my house and I thought they were a threat to me. But by coming into my house, I'm assuming you're a threat to me.
Yes.
I'm gonna be honest with you. If you took my hand sanitizer off my desk right now and walked out with it, I'm not gonna chase you down and knock you out.
I actually really like that.
It does smell good, doesn't it? Okay, here's what I want you to understand though. Okay, the Declaration of Independence has been called a number of things. Okay, but it is a philosophical understanding of why the behaviors of the colonists are justified though. You understand that? Right? Like, this is not just an I don't like you. This is not a statement of, well, we tried, but it doesn't work. Right? There's a whole list of grievances, right, that is applied directly to the King of England and all of his tyrannical behaviors and his unwillingness to recognize sort of basic human rights. Right? So it is from the Declaration of Independence that we get a large number of our provisions that are essential to America. Right? I mean, it starts when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. Right? What does that mean? That is an intellectual, philosophical idea saying that no person is above God. That God has given us certain things. Right? We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay? Now there are some inconsistencies. There are intellectual inconsistencies. Make no mistake about it. Okay? You cannot tell me all men are created equal and then turn around and enslave people. Right? You cannot tell me all people are born free and then have literally maternal birth slavery. Right? Like mommy was a slave, you are born a slave. That is a violation of this basic premise of liberty, right? Of God-given liberty, of an inalienable right to liberty. Now look, I need you to understand, nobody is saying that you cannot have your liberty taken. Do you understand that? Right? Like if I were to murder you, what happens to me? I go to prison. Am I free? No, I'm in prison. Right? But that is a result of my behavior, not a result of the fact that I was somehow born into a lower station in life than the rest of you. Alright? So, by 1776, we are fully into war. And here's this is what I find most fascinating about the American Revolution. Right? So we have, let's just say for the sake of argument, we have 3.5 million people living in the colonies at this point. I think my number is fairly accurate. right? 3.5 million. What percentage of those people do you think would be necessary for a revolution to occur? 10%?
10 people.
What?
10 people is a cult and you're all dead. 10 people would not stand up to an army. Like, what percentage of the population would have to be actively engaged in a revolution in order for a revolution to succeed? All of them? No. So let's do this. I'm going to give you 4 options. I'm going to give you 4 options. 5%, 20%, 50%, 75%.
I think 75.
25.
Was 25 one of the options?
No, it's 20.
5, 20, 50, 75.
Go on 5.
What percentage of the population would need to actively support a revolution in order for a revolution to occur?
5.
20, 75.
20%.
20%.
That's it. What percentage of the population is actively aiding the British?
8.
God, no. Roughly another quarter. So if a little less than a quarter are aiding the Patriots, and a little less than a quarter are aiding the Tories, what does that leave us with?
2 quarters.
Or 50%. What is that 50% doing?
Spectating.
What's that, Sophia?
Spectating.
Spectating. That is correct. That's it. The majority of the population is just spectating. They are not involved. They are apathetic. They have not picked a side. Now, some of those people did that because they were opportunists. Do you know what that means? And we take in world history, yes? Right? What do we know about the Italians in world wars? They're genius, right? God love the Italians. They're the smartest of all Europeans. Why? Because when Germany comes and invades, they're like, no, Germany, we're with you, we're friends, we're good. And then the British and the Americans eventually come and start overtaking the Germans, and the Italians are like, hey, we didn't really like them. We didn't really like them, we're with you now. Right? Italy has switched sides both times. That is an opportunist position, right? You are just going to run with the front runners. You are a bandwagon person, right?
Patriots fans.
Okay? There are definitely bandwagoners amongst that 50%, but most of that 50% is apathetic. They don't care one way or the other. Because on some level, they don't see their lives changing as a result of anything. Therefore, what difference does it make? Hey, you need to understand the differences in the groups, though. So you need to know the Patriots are the colonials. The Tories are colonials that are siding with the British. Right? And then you have the apathetic or the neutral group. Right? When you look at loyalists, a lot of them were in the South specifically. Right? A lot of them in South Carolina, really. Interestingly, I find this interesting. Amongst the Patriots, you had a large number of clergy, right? Religious-based people. Which I find interesting because on some level religion teaches, you know, passivity, right? Like you're not supposed to go out and kill. I don't know of any religion that actively tells you to go murder people, right? I mean, there might be a crazy one, but I don't know of any. Okay? But on the other hand, you have coming out of the Age of Enlightenment this idea of divine rights and sort of man's interaction and relations with God outside of some intermediary. Do you understand that? Do we know what an intermediary is? So like if you go back, I'm not a very good Catholic. If you go back historically, right? How did Catholic people talk to God?
Through the they talk to the saints. Or the,
You like intermediaries, right? Like why do you go to confession? Because then the priest can like talk to God and get your forgiveness. Okay? That is a concept of an intermediary, right? The divine right of kings is a concept of an intermediary. God has placed this person above you. That is why they are king. They were born that way because God wanted them to be that way, because God has ordained that they are better than you. Okay? That was a routine belief in society prior to the Enlightenment. Right? And America doesn't exist without the Enlightenment. Right? At least not America the way we think of it today. Okay? A lot of America is coming out of this enlightened ideal. Alright. So the British military is just ridiculously strong. Ridiculously strong. They have 300,000 soldiers, a significant amount of their navy. They actually hire out, right? They hire mercenaries. Do we know what a mercenary is? Soldier for hire. Right? And really good job, like financially. Okay? And it's existed for obviously for a very, very long time. It still exists today. You have private companies in the United States who contract out like private soldiers that were in the Middle East during the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. Right? They are mercenaries. They are paid differently than the military. And our German mercenaries were called Hessians. Okay? A significant number of Native American tribes are going to align with the British as well. Okay? And I think we talked about the Cherokee specifically as being one of them, right? When we did our Native American unit, the Cherokee side with the British because the Cherokee believe the British are more likely to allow the Cherokee to maintain their lands, right? Whereas the colonials, the colonists are the ones who continue to expand further and further and further west and eat up more and more and more Native American land. Right?
You said the who?
The Cherokee were one of the examples. Right? The British, despite the British having some significant advantages in the war, right? And those advantages, just so you're clear, those advantages are both in terms of experience. They had professional soldiers, right? Do you understand the significance of professional soldiers versus like unprofessional soldiers? No, not necessarily, because the reality is most of us, I mean, it's ingrained to human nature. You understand, like, fight or flight instinct, yes? Right? Like, if you were about to be murdered, most of you would fight back instinctively. Like, that's human, that's animalistic behaviors, right? But here's the thing, because obviously I'm a trained soldier. If the United States were invaded right now, right, and I became your commanding officer and we all had to defend ourselves, and I told you to dig in, what does that mean?
Foxhole.
How deep does it need to be?
6 feet.
Don't dig yourself a 6-foot hole, you're going to die down there, and then we he's just gonna bury you because you're 6 feet deep. Right? Natalie, that's actually not bad. 2 to 3. Okay? What does flank mean? So here's the thing, y'all realize a lot of you would have no idea what we're talking about, right? Okay? And I need you to understand that when you're talking about troop movements or combat behaviors under fire, it gets even significantly more difficult. Right? Because again, a fight or flight response is going to teach you, right, that instinctual aspect. You are going to want to preserve your own life. That is a routine, normal human behavior. Everybody should want to preserve their own life, right? But that means that if somebody is shooting at you in combat and you have not been incredibly well trained, the likelihood of you doing what you're supposed to goes down drastically. Okay? The British have professional soldiers. The Americans do not. Okay? The British have a navy. The Americans really don't. Right? Like, we take some of our commercial ships, some of our merchant ships, and try to outfit them for war, but like, we don't have a real navy. Right? Here's the next problem. How do you get all that stuff? What'd you say, Sophia?
Money.
You gotta buy it, yes? Right? How does government buy it?
Taxes.
With taxes. Where are the colonial taxes going?
To the land.
To the British. Right? Like, there is no colonial government to pay for it. Which means your only option is to buy it on credit. But here's the problem, right? Like, let's just say for the sake of argument, Aaron came to me and was like, hey, I need to borrow like $500 for a gun. I'm going to go to war with like the entirety of the senior class. Am I going to lend him $500? No, because he's going to die and I'm not going to get that money back. He is grossly outnumbered. So if you're the colonist, who can you ask for money? Well, you're going to ask France, and France is actually going to help you. But France is not, I mean, interestingly enough, France is not helping you initially because they think you have a chance to win. France is helping you initially because for every dollar that they give you to kill British people, that's one less British person they have to kill. Right? And they don't like the British. Okay? But they're not doing it initially because they think it's a good investment in terms of like, oh, the colonials will win and then they'll repay their debts.
Can I go to the bathroom?
Sure. All right, so the Continental Army. Did we talk about this yesterday, the difference between militia and the Continental Army? Not really? Dude, you weren't even here yesterday, man. Maddie, is it M-A-D-I or M-A-D-D-I-E?
M-A-D-D-I-E.
Okay.
Acosta.
When did that change?
When did what change?
I don't know.
My last name? Never.
No, it used to be M-A-D-I, like that's how everybody was spelling it, and then they went
that
back to
would be special.
M-A-D-D-I. Alright. Okay, so understand there's a difference. There's a difference. So when we look at our army, we're saying it's composed of 200,000 soldiers. Out of those 200,000 soldiers, right, roughly half of them are militiamen, half of them are regular soldiers. Okay? I'm going to be honest with you. We would not have won without the militiamen. Right? We wouldn't have. But militiamen are not great. Because militiamen aren't soldiers. They're not even trained like soldiers. Right? When winter happens, the militiamen go home. Okay. Maybe this is unknown to you. Okay, so in the 18th century, people did not fight during the winter, and they did not fight at night for the most part. Okay? Well, one, because for both sides, in the wintertime, it's significantly harder to resupply. It's significantly harder to like maintain your own health and well-being, right? Because as the weather drops and you're exposed to the elements, people get sick more frequently, right? Then you have disease running through your camp. And if you're bombing other people, they're bombing you. There's just sort of, this goes back to that odd concept of like civility during war. I don't get it. I don't understand why white folk thought civility during war was a good thing. I'm going to be honest with you. If I'm ever in charge of the country, right, and I got to go to war, I am killing everybody indiscriminately. Everybody. I don't want to go to war. But if you force my hand, I will kill you all. Because that is the purpose of war. But we don't do that. Right? Like we don't now, and look, I get not fighting in the wintertime because you have to take your own health and well-being into account. Right? I mean, if we fight during the wintertime and I kill 100 of you, and then as a result of the fighting, like 200 of me die from disease and exposure and things like that, well, it didn't do me any good, right? We have issues fighting at night as well. Obviously, we don't have any sort of visibility, right? So you're not fighting at night. But all of these militiamen, they're untrained. They can come and go as they please. They're not subject to any sort of like military order or structure or law. They're not very well drilled. Do you know what drill means? Trained, but trained specifically in terms of like movements, right? So when you talk about drilling a unit in the military, you're talking about how you move in specific like directions, intervals, distances, things like that, right? So that way, if the enemy is over there, you know you all like right face, right? You would spread out, like all of these different things that would be a part of it, right? Our Continental Army, for the most part, relatively young, right? Again, significant lack of experience. And the longer a war drags on, the higher the likelihood you're going to have of desertion. Do we know what desertion is? Leaving, right? The military term for that is AWOL, absent without leave. And you'll have a large number that essentially decide for themselves it is no longer worth it. Right? Who's my person in here that did the Hatfields and McCoys? Did you get any of that out of the Hatfields and McCoys when you did your research? I want to say it was Devil Anse Hatfield that deserted the Confederate Army, and McCoy was a POW, which was a part of their conflict. Because McCoy thought Hatfield was dishonorable in that behavior. Right? But here's the other thing that I need you to understand. Like if you are a man, let's say you were a 30-year-old man, right, and you leave your little family farm and you are gone for 2 or 3 years fighting a war, what's happening at home?
Your family thinks you're dead.
They might think you're dead.
Or they're moving on to not dead.
Daddy's home.
But you understand they're down a significant source of labor, yes? Because you were doing most of the work on your farm. What? Exactly. So they might be starving to death because you're gone. Right? And here's the thing. At that point, you then have to sort of ask yourself as a man, what do I have a greater obligation to? Do I have a greater obligation to, like, my country and my fellow soldier? Do I have a greater obligation to some sort of theoretical ideal of freedom? Or do I have a greater obligation to my own wife and children?
Why think no.
Well, I don't know that there's a correct answer.
The correct answer is freedom.
No, there's Guys, stop. There's not, listen, I need you to understand there's not a correct answer. That is a personal decision, right? For some people, the answer is wife and children. For other people, they would say, look, man, if I go home and then we're sort of enslaved and we don't have freedom, what good did going home do? Right? So for others, they think that their obligation to their wife and children might be better served by continuing to fight for freedom so that their children would have a better chance in life. Okay? The Continental Congress is going to try to incentivize soldiers as much as possible, right? By providing things like grants, land, cash, anything that they can. I mean, the cash is worthless. They don't really, but they're gonna try, right? Because they need to try to increase participation, volunteers, all of that, right? And so some of the sort of unique figures, all right, or significant figures. Henry Lee is a Virginian. Okay, a lot of our military prowess in the United States comes from the South. Right, I used to joke when I was in the Marine Corps that 90% of the Marine Corps came from Texas. Right? You'll see this when we get into the Civil War as well. Right? Most of our experienced officers in the Civil War are actually Confederate officers. Okay? The South has a stronger military tradition than the North does. Right? So Lee forms his own cavalry brigade, and then this is one of those guys who is famous for sort of the hit and run concepts for not engaging in the typical British volley on an open field kind of concept, right? Where you shoot at me, I shoot at you, last man standing wins. Right? In any war, there are prisons, right? Anybody that's captured goes into a prisoner, a war prison. War prisons are a couple of things. One, they're very frequently makeshift, right? Meaning that you're building them hastily. They're not very good, right? Disease would run rampant in military, in prison camps, right? For prisoners of war. Sometimes they were on British ships out in the harbor. You would have limited access to clean water or food. Right? Ships at this point had rats. Rats carry diseases. The likelihood of you dying in a prison camp is actually fairly high. Right? And I want you to say, I don't believe that it's a direct result of hostility or, what's the better word? The British aren't doing this, they're not trying to kill POWs, let's say it that way. Okay? It's not like they're taking prisoners of war and putting them in these camps and intentionally like torturing them, starving them, like putting them in stockades, things like that. Okay? Were they ever beaten? Yes, of course they were. But I think the lack of food or clean water or overcrowding in the prisons or disease that runs rampant in the prisons is really more a result of a lack of resources than anything else. Right? Again, the British are the away team in this ordeal. We understand that? Like, they are the ones removed from their home base, their supply lines, like all of their stuff. So their inability, and just so we're clear, right, like if you are the British and you've got 100 guys guarding a POW camp, right, and you've got 100 prisoners in there, and you can only feed 150 people, right, like you've only got the rations for 150. No, let's say you've got the rations for, let's say you got the rations for 150, right? So there's 200 people there. Do you give everybody 3/4 rations? Or do you give your guys a full ration and the prisoners a half ration? I mean, if you were in command, what would you do? going to take care of my own people first. Right? Because if my people go down, how can I control the prison? We understand that? Alright. There's some significant financial struggles throughout the war. Okay? This is due to a variety of reasons. Again, we already talked about this. Congress, the Continental Congress that's created, that does meet from time to time, I mean, they're the ones that like appoint General Washington to be the commander of the Continental Army. They don't have a power to tax. They can't tax, which means they can't raise money. They're basically beggars with a handout, right? Like hat in hand, asking the states to provide funds in order to meet the war requirements. Okay? The states honestly treat this like a group project in high school. Right? You know what I mean when I say that?
Only one person does the work.
Yeah, you assume somebody else is going to do the work for you. Yes? So you do as little as humanly possible. The states aren't providing a fair share of the war expenses because they are hoping that other states will pick up the slack. That forces Congress into a concept where they are basically buying everything on credit. And so everything that they get is with the people that are supplying it are hoping and praying that they will be reimbursed somewhere down the line, right? That there will be some sort of future payment for all of the things that they are providing to the government, right? Because again, war is incredibly expensive, and not just military tools, right? I'm not just talking about like bullets and guns and boots, right? Those get expensive for troops. But you realize that for the most part, you only have to buy a soldier one gun, yes? And actually, at some point, we'll learn, like, then you don't even have to buy soldiers' guns. During World War II, the Russians literally just threw people on a train and sent them to the front lines and told them when you get there, like, grab a pair of boots off a dead body and, like, grab their jacket and their gun and go to work. Like, you went to war in Russia during World War II with zero supplies, with the assumption that you would just grave rob, essentially, when you got to the front line. Right? But what can you not do that with? The answer is food. Right? Food is something that has to be continuously purchased, right? Because there's an old saying that a military marches on its stomach. Okay? If the military is well fed, they will continue to behave in the manner in which you want them to behave. The minute you start starving them is the minute mutinies and treason and things like that occur. Both sides are trying to recruit natives. Okay, that shouldn't surprise anybody. We already talked about this, though. The British are more successful. And I mean, the colonists are trying to recruit natives, and they're making promises to natives. But these are the same people that have made promises to natives over and over and over again, and continued to break those promises. And the natives aren't stupid, and they're figuring it out. Okay? Again, I don't know if the British had won. Honestly, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that the British don't eventually move the Native Americans off, just like the white people, just like colonists did, just like Americans did. But the natives were at least more hopeful. Okay, the proclamation line of 1763 is a good step in the right direction as far as they're concerned. It didn't remove white people from the equation, because the reality is by this point, Native Americans don't want white people removed from the continent. White people have brought a significant amount of technology to the continent that has aided Native Americans, right? I mean, technology in the sense of like guns and gunpowder, but also things like horses, right? The Native American way of life has drastically changed as a result of European influences being introduced. They don't want white people to go away. They just don't want white people to encroach any further than they already have. Okay? That would afford them a trading partner and somebody to do business with and somebody to get technological advancements out of, but it would not further deteriorate their land. Okay? There is some significant deviation amongst Native American tribes, and I'm not going to test you, like I would never ask you a test question like which tribe joined which side, right? All I really want you to understand is I want you to understand that Native American tribes joined both sides, right? And the individual tribes, the individual clans were making those decisions for themselves based upon relationships they already had with either British officers and British military personnel along the frontier in the Ohio River Valley, or with or with colonists east of the Appalachian region, right? So they're going to make that decision essentially for themselves. Americans are going to attack Canada, so just to go back, we understand 13 colonies joined together, right? Do we understand there's really a 14th British colony?
No.
It's called Canada, right? And I mean, the reality is you could probably break Canada down into Newfoundland and Quebec, right? Because Quebec was the French territory that they took over after the French and Indian War. Anybody know where Newfoundland is? East and up. Good job, Tyler. So it's where you would basically come in first, right? So this is Newfoundland. This is Nova Scotia. It probably still would have been one province at that time, but this is the Gulf of the St. Lawrence, and the St. Lawrence River is the one that runs down into Montreal and then Quebec in that region. And that's all British now at this point. And so I want you to understand, if you are the colonials, if you are the U.S. Congress, right, or the colonial Congress at this time, right, I think it stands to reason. I think it's a fair assumption, right, that as the 13 of us have band together, and this 14th and maybe 15th colony up here, or Canada, has sided with the British, that can't last, right? Either the colonials will control the continent, or England will control the continent, okay? Because if they allow the British to control Canada, Canada becomes a staging point for future British invasions into the colonies in order to retake the colonies. So the colonists, whatever we're calling them, right, are actually going to attack Quebec in December of '75. Okay? Their initial hope is to try to get the French Canadians on their side. Okay? Doesn't happen. By the way, don't invade Canada in December. That's not very smart. Right? Okay? Very, very cold up there. But it ultimately becomes a disaster for the colonial army. They're incapable of convincing the French to join them, right? And they lose a large number of people because they're overextended. They've now basically taken up action in December, which exposes them to all sorts of disease and things of that nature. All right? And how much time do I have? Are we out of time? No, I got 5 minutes. All right? I don't know why people are packing up with 5 minutes to go. All right? Washington initially, and again, when we talk about wars in this class over and over again, we'll talk about sort of the beginning, the turning point, and then the conclusion, right? Otherwise, it's not really a war to talk about, like, because it's just a beatdown. You understand that? Like, if there's no turning point, then it's just a bully picking on a weaker country. Okay? The British are very, very successful early on. Okay? And the French are actually more hesitant to aid us, in large part because of how ineffective the colonial troops are initially. Right? Washington is outside of New York, right? The British are control the New York harbor. They control the Boston harbor, right? They're going to actually land in New York, and New York is going to be a point of an invasion point for the British Army. And they come initially with such an overwhelming force that Washington is forced to retreat. Okay? Washington is almost captured. His entire army is almost destroyed. Okay? New York is, or becomes, a loyalist center for the British. Right? So as the British take New York City early in the war, they're going to use New York as a sort of a home base for the war effort into the Americas. Right? And that's significant for the British because it gives them a great port in order to come and unload everything, resupply, all of that. Right? For the British, ports and the sea are incredibly significant because without controlling the ports, without controlling those harbors, they would not have been able to resupply or do things like that. Alright? So Washington is initially trying to defend New York. The British are going to come. They capture it relatively easily. Right? They essentially, they don't burn it to the ground, but they're going to destroy a whole lot of New York in order to try to really burn out any presence of resistance within New York. Now, interestingly enough, one of the reasons that they think Washington becomes so great, and one of the reasons they think that Washington and the colonials become successful, as Washington retreats, right, and gives up New York, he's going to allow the British to take New York, right? New York, then I told you, becomes the headquarters for the British. Washington has spies that stay behind in New York City, right? People that look like ordinary merchants, right? To include women, right? Like Washington has female spies that are, tavern keepers, right? Or innkeepers, or, maids. They take in laundry for British soldiers. Do you understand, like, as a woman, how significant that can be? Right? Because you realize that if a British officer keeps bringing you his uniforms to, like, clean and press and whatnot, right, you as a woman could engage that officer in like, conversation. Do you think that dude would accidentally tell you things he shouldn't?
Yeah.
Probably, because you're just a woman. This is man stuff you don't understand. There's an arrogance that Washington is able to take advantage of there, right? Because they wouldn't suspect that women would be capable of engaging in such behavior. Because there's just some significant differences in terms of, like, expectations for women. Yes, ma'am? No. The spies? Not really. To the best of my knowledge, no. Right? But they're essentially getting it like two ways. Like they're benefiting two ways, right? Because their outward appearance toward the British, if the British are successful, they're going to look like Tories, and therefore they're going to win when the war is over. If the colonists win, right, because they were a double agent, because they were a spy, now they can come back to the colonist side and be elevated there and get stuff as a result. A lot of the times in war, it's not about getting paid during the war, it's about getting the spoils of war after the fact. Alright? So we'll stop there, and then we'll move into some of the losses moving forward. I'm changing your quiz. It's not due tonight. It will be due tomorrow night. Alright? So you do not have homework tonight. No homework.